You're listening to the Sisters in Loss podcast, a faith-based grief and loss podcast for Black women, where you will hear stories of miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility to learn there is a testimony in tragedy. You will learn how to heal, gain clarity, find hope and peace, and turn your pain into your purpose after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee. Welcome to episode 77 of the Sisters in Loss podcast and the last episode of the year. In today's episode, we talk about coping with loss. How have you coped with your loss? In today's episode, we have Andrea Fenise, who shares her second trimester miscarriage and how she is coping with loss. Andrea is a mom, wife, and creative entrepreneur. She raised her daughter Amira for 9 years as a single mother. She found love, married, and was excited to be pregnant with a girl named Olivia Isabelle. She lost Olivia at 17 weeks, and in this episode, she goes into detail of her journey to motherhood and how she coped with the loss. This episode is for you to listen to if you've experienced a second trimester miscarriage or have struggled to cope with loss. Here is Andrea Fenise.
All right. Thank you, Andrea, for being on the podcast. Well, I like to begin the podcast with you sharing a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So, Erica, just as quickly or as concise as I can, I am Andrea Fenise. I have, for the past 9 years, been self-employed as a creative entrepreneur. So I've run the gamut of owning a retail store, an e-commerce site, to designing bridal gowns. And now I have used all of those services that I provided for myself as a creative entrepreneur. I now provide those for others. I own a creative agency called AFLD Creative, in which I do branding, web design, social media content creation, and writing and styling for other publications in the city. So small but big still, but I just like to use the word creative entrepreneur.
Awesome. I love that term, sis. So take us back on your journey to motherhood and share with us your loss journey.
So motherhood for me began as a mother of now a 9-year-old baby girl. Her name is Amira, and I raised her by myself. Her dad and I have a really great co-parenting relationship, but we physically are in 2 different cities. So I raised her by myself for a while. I'm recently married, and so we have my children, his children, or my child, his children, and then we made a baby out of love. And I miscarried my sweet baby girl, Olivia, at 17 weeks pregnant. So just to take you through the recent journey of motherhood and with my loss, I'm a little older, I guess, in the prenatal world. So I'm 37. So when we conceived, I was going to high-risk prenatal visits. And during one of the 12-week ultrasound visits, our doctor informed us of the baby having excessive fluid around her head and her neck. And I think they call it cystic hygroma as like the scientific term. But she basically had a lot of fluid around her head and her neck. And he said that normally cystic hygroma is coupled with a genetic disorder. And so we opted to get a genetic test. And I was very, very distraught. I had a normal pregnancy with Amira. And I guess I just was oblivious to the fact that something could go wrong. I had not heard of nor did I have a lot of friends who miscarried or dealt with any situation similar to this. So I was very worried about what would happen to her, although I'd never seen her before. I prayed that everything would be okay, that I would receive a miracle, that most of the fluid would be resolved. And I was hopeful, although my doctor wasn't. My doctor was convinced that the fluid would not resolve. And I guess because he's seen this so many times. So he was very black or white. I, on the other hand, was like, you don't know my God. My God performed miracles every day. the whole gist. But he gave us an option to medically terminate then at the 12-week ultrasound visit. And he told us that there would be a 50% chance of her surviving. Of course, I continued to pray. My mother prayed, my husband prayed, and we went to our 16-week visit for the follow-up, and there was no heartbeat. She had already passed. And she may have passed at the visit. It was probably 3 or 4 days that she had already passed because of the growth. I guess they see by the inches every week. And she had reached a certain limit of growth. And so she passed. I guess that's the most thorough explanation of the loss. And it was devastating. It was devastating.
So share with us, after you found out, that she passed, how did you birth her? Did you go through labor and delivery and deliver her vaginally, or did they opt to do some other type of procedure? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. At the 16-week visit, they told us, I would have to do a D&E procedure because I was in my second trimester, and it had literally been a week almost since she probably had passed. We had just got back from a 2-week vacation out west, and she probably passed, earlier in that vacation, and I hadn't seen any blood or anything. So they scheduled a D&E surgery for 2 days later, and I was informed that I could possibly see blood. She would pass any day. Nature hadn't caught on yet, obviously, so I would have to go in and get a procedure, and I had a D&E 2 days after that ultrasound visit. And so that for me was very hard because, of course, we were given the option to medically terminate, and physically I would go through the same procedure as a medical termination or an abortion. And the D&E is simply that. They call it, spontaneous abortion or removing a spontaneous abortion, but I had to get her surgically removed. She didn't pass on her own.
Wow. So how was your recovery after that, after the procedure, and then physically, and then just talk about your spiritual journey after you all left the hospital?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. You mean physically recovery or mental and spiritual? Because physically, I was okay. I didn't expect as much blood after I bled really, really heavy. I didn't expect the cramping, the uterus trying to get back to its normal state. I did not have to have an epidural. The anesthesia was enough because I've never been hospitalized, never had to have any strong medication. I only take a multivitamin a day. So medicine and my tolerance of pain medicine or anesthesia was very low. So I'm thankful I didn't have to go through recovering from epidural. But I came home and rested a lot. I ate a lot of food that I researched was, healing and comforting to the body. And I just tried to take it easy physically. Spiritually and mentally, it was definitely a struggle. And I think mentally and spiritually was the biggest challenge for me. I felt like I was so discouraged. I felt like God had rejected me. Praying all those days, literally every moment of the day, I prayed, I talked to God, I walked and I talked, and I felt like he rejected me, and he said no. And I felt like all of my prayers were basically unanswered or unheard. And then emotionally, I felt like I didn't have control. And you know how we are as mothers. We want to control everything. We want things to go perfectly and organized. And none of it worked out in the way I wanted it to or I expected it to. I grieved a change in my plans as far as my pregnancy. So it was very hard for me to get through that, both mentally and spiritually.
So tell us about how it impacted your relationships with your husband, and talk about how you told your kids. How did sitting down and telling them and having to explain to them exactly what happened, and then how did they grieve? Kind of take us through that journey as well.
Yes. So I'm in an interracial marriage. My husband is Mexican. And so sometimes I would feel as if So his kids were with us when we went for the initial visit, and we found out that she had cystic hygroma. My baby was not. She was in Atlanta with my mom on spring break. And so his kids were actually in the room when the doctor came in and told us that there was something wrong, and they were confused. Of course, there was a lot of like big words used, cystic hygroma, fluid, blah, 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 blah. And because my husband is of an entirely different culture and English is not his first language, he had to take a few minutes and we had to go home and actually have to discuss what the doctor really said, So initially, he didn't understand. And as I started explaining to him what it was, and of course I was in pharmacy school, so I have a more extensive background in like health and scientific terms, but my husband was very black and white. And being a newlywed and dealing with that was very challenging for us because he was very on the spectrum of, if she is going to have a disability, if something is wrong with her, I don't want her to come into the world. And we have to deal with that, or she has to deal with having, physical deformities or learning disabilities. He didn't want that for her. I, on the other hand, as a mother, was like, I'm going to, take my baby as she is. God hasn't put more on you than you can bear. And he didn't have that same perspective. And so it was hard for me to understand why he didn't have that perspective. But after, talks and being very transparent and honest about my feelings, we got through that. And I'm grateful that it didn't cause a burden on our marriage and that God made the choice for us and we didn't have to choose. Because if we would have had to make the choice, I'm not sure where we would be in our marriage. I explained to my daughter the possibility of the baby not being full term and making it to the world by being open with her about grief. We lost my dad 5 years ago. And so when I picked her up from a coding camp after school, I, had a big girl talk with her and said, because the gender was revealed during the genetic test as well. And I said, I have good news and I have bad news about the baby. Which one do you want? And she said the good news. I said, well, you're going to have a baby sister, which she was very excited about. And I said, she's sick and she may have to go where Big Daddy went, which is to heaven. And she asked why. And, I told her in the most simplest form that I could that she had a lot of fluid around her head and her heart may just stop. But when I had to let her know that she passed, she was hurt. She cried. But I felt like I had already warned her, and I just reassured her that we would try again and I would try to give her another baby sister, or God may give us a baby brother, and that she's in a better place. So that's how I explained it to his kids and my kids. And then my husband and I just worked through it the best way we could.
Hey, sister-in-laws. It is December and Christmas is near. The best Christmas gift you can give me is to rate and review the Sisters-in-Laws podcast. What is your favorite episode that you've heard in 2018? What episode resonated with you the most on your grief journey? Let me know in your review. Give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. That is the best Christmas gift that you can give me, by leaving a review. I'm trying to get to 100 reviews by the end of 2018. So thank you so much in advance for your reviews, and I look forward to what we have in store for 2019.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So another question that a lot of parents have, and something that we talk about, especially for parents who have kids before they've lost the kids, how do you parent differently after your loss? Do you feel like you parent differently now since you've had a actual loss of your daughter and your bonus children?
The way that I turned what was such a dark moment for me into such a bright moment for parenting with Amira. So she's here with us every day. We have visitation with my husband's kids, and they're here every other weekend. So it's a little bit different. She's here while I'm dealing with the things I'm dealing with. And really, I had to give myself a couple of wake-up calls and say, you have a baby. You know, you lost a baby you never knew, but you still have to go on with like parenting the one that you have and the other kids that you have. And they really, not that they don't deserve anything different, but life still goes on for them. You know, children go through things and they get over it quickly. And so it's brought us a lot closer, especially Amira and I. You know, I try to be more conscious of the fact that I do have her. And like I said, we still have to have our mommy and daughter days. Even if I'm sad, I still have to do homework. I still have to spend quality time with her. And when my husband's kids come over, you know, we still have to have our family days. So life had to keep moving for me. I couldn't, you know, hold on so tightly to the baby that I lost and get myself in such a dark place where I could not parent the same.
Awesome. Thank you for explaining that. I think that we all go through that grief cycle, but it is more difficult when you already do have kids because you still have to keep going just for them. So I appreciate you sharing that. So let's talk about really your spiritual walk. So talk a little bit about it, but really share with us how your spiritual journey was. How really, you know, did you turn to Christ more? Did you stray away from God? Did you question God? Really take us back on that spiritual journey as you begin to heal after your loss.
I will be very forthcoming and honest. I not necessarily straight away, but for a very brief moment, I felt like God didn't listen, or God did not, like my mom would always say, give me the desires of my heart. I desired a baby made of love. I desired a baby that I created in a marriage. And for a minute, I felt like the devil, you know, it worked out for the devil and not necessarily for my good. And so I strayed away for a minute, but then quickly I got myself together and realized that I wasn't in control. And essentially God is in control. Sometimes he says no to our prayers. And I had to just tell myself, sometimes God tells you no. Some people will tell you that every prayer is answered, but sometimes the answer is no. And this loss taught me that. It was a very powerful spiritual lesson. Sadly, I had to learn, but I'm glad I did. And that really is a prayer, is when we pray as human beings here on earth, it basically burns down the walls of our own egos, right? So we have these egos that we can do anything if we properly plan, if we take the right medicine, don't jump too high, we won't miscarry, you know, all these things that we create in our mind that we're in control, or our ego creates. But at the end of the day, it's about bringing delight to God. And so when we pray to bring delight to God, and that delight comes right back to us. And that's what I had to learn, is that he may have said no for right now, but I don't know what's around the corner tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, he may give me the biggest blessing from this no. He may say yes, and that yes is so abundant and filled with so much beauty that I had to accept no for this moment. So, you know, I strayed away for a minute, but I quickly got myself right back together because, you know, I can't walk without him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what resources or tools did you use to help you on your healing journey?
You know, I really, when I first found out that she had a genetic disorder, I started searching the internet, you know, going to the library, looking for all these books on, you know, Turner syndrome, because that's what she had. She had Turner syndrome, which means she lacked an X chromosome, and that's always coupled with cystic hygroma most of the time. And so I started looking up all these resources. And of course, you know, the back of my mind was thinking that I would miscarry. So I started looking up resources for miscarriage, and I didn't see a lot. And I think that's because women don't talk about it. And using a hashtag, I found platforms like yours where women are talking about loss. And doing Google searches, there were some bloggers who were talking about miscarriage, but I did not find a lot of resources for dealing with miscarriage or for women who look like me that were dealing with miscarriage. And I found that strange. And I found where there was a huge void for resources. You know, I couldn't talk to some of my friends who, you know, had miscarriage. I found out later that they miscarried, but, you know, realizing now a lot of my friends have miscarried and they didn't have resources or they didn't talk about it. So I had no one else to turn to.
Absolutely. I felt the exact same way. And it's the reason why I started this podcast, for that reason, because I feel like a lot of Black women, we hold it in and we don't share.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much power in us just telling our story, because you just never know what little tidbit in that story is going to help you out. So thank you for being willing to share your story on this podcast, because I think that helps so many other women are going to be touched by your words and your story and your journey. So I completely agree.
You know, in a second trimester loss, I heard or found a lot of resources at 6 to 8 week miscarriages or 10, but there is not a lot of people talking about miscarrying when you've had a baby bump and when you've, you know, planned out natural home births and you've started shopping for the nursery. And it's like, whoa, we need to talk about this loss when you're big and pregnant, you know, not 6 and 8 weeks when you just think it's a little spot, you know? So there's a whole nother world of conversation and dialogue and discussions about later losses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you. Yes, absolutely. I can't even say anymore, because I'm the same way. My loss was at 18 weeks. So we were very, very similar. Mm-hmm. in the time frame on when my loss was. So I understand the dynamic of having a loss in that time frame, because I didn't hear people having losses in the second trimester either. Mostly it was like stillbirths, you know, further along in the pregnancy, at least past 24 weeks, but not in that 12 to 24 week period. No, I hadn't heard of anybody either. So it was definitely something that I wanted to highlight, and definitely something I wanted to show people and tell people that there are losses of all kinds, and we still deal with it the same way. You know, your loss isn't greater than mine isn't greater than yours, but we're a part of this sisterhood that we didn't really want to be a part
of. I know.
But we're here together now, and we're going to help each other, you know, pick each other up and keep it moving. And one thing that I've loved about the sisterhood that we've created online and offline is that everyone, you may not know everyone's story or their journey, but there's such a commonality of peace when you're around people who understand that you've lost a child in general. That it makes it puts you at ease, because not even your best friends, if your best friends haven't gone through this, they just don't know how to articulate and understand exactly the feelings that you have and the things that you deal with every day. So I appreciate the sisterhood online and offline, because if I didn't have that, my life wouldn't be complete, because you need to have people who know the feelings in your corner, because then they can help you when you're having those low moments.
Yes, that's so true.
When something around you triggers you, you know, going to the grocery store, going to the baby aisle may still trigger you, and sometimes you just need somebody to call and be like, "Girl, I had a moment today." Mm-hmm. I snap it and bring it back together, but I just want to let you know I had a moment. I cried, I let it out, I let it go. And you need that. You need that support around you. So we do it every day in our Facebook group on sistersinloss.com. For those of you who aren't a part of our Facebook group, you all should join, because people post in there every day. I'm like, you all just be honest with us, be transparent, because if you don't have anywhere else you can go to, you can come to us and we'll surround you. We'll pray for you. We'll tell you, girl, we had that same issue.
Yes, you need that. You need it.
Absolutely. So let's talk about really just encouraging words. So what encouraging words can you leave with the listeners who are in a very similar position as you are? You know, they've experienced a loss and they're in that place where they're ready to try again. What encouraging words can you leave with them?
I would encourage anyone who is just like myself with a couple of things. One is that you aren't alone. And so for me, that was an overwhelming and overarching feeling that I felt, was that I was alone and that no one else understood what I was going through. But you realize there's this sisterhood in a community of women just like yourself. I didn't realize it until I started being open and posting a blog post about the miscarriage, that so many other women, I was blown away by how many women have experienced loss. And so I realized then, okay, snap out of it, girlfriend, because you aren't in this alone. There's someone else who is actually going to have a D&E this Thursday. And that's really what happened. I opened up about it, wrote a blog post, posted on Facebook, and then started getting these messages. Hey, I didn't want to say anything. Thank you for your transparency. I have a D&E scheduled this Thursday. What was that like? How do you feel? And so I would encourage every woman to understand that you aren't alone. And the biggest lesson for me was that I'm not in control. God is in control of every waking moment of our lives. And we have gotten so accustomed to planning things out, writing these weekly schedules, daily schedules, making these goals and, all these organized ways of living. And we forget that God is a designer of our lives and we are not. And that was the biggest lesson for me, is that I am not in control. I'm a very goal-oriented, ambitious, highly driven, motivated, and focused person. But this loss made me realize that, girl, you ain't navigating this. I got this. And so I would encourage every woman to relinquish the control and understand and give it to God. Like, you can't do this. This isn't yours. So hopefully that encourages someone else.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So where can we find you on social, and what's your website? So if people want to work with you, they can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, totally. I am on my website is AndreaFenise.com. So that's just like Denise, but with an F. AndreaFenise.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. We have a million social media handles to take care of every day. But on all the platforms, I am on AndreaFenise.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea, for being on the podcast and sharing your story with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having this platform. It is so needed. And thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I pray that this show was inspirational and a blessing to you. For show notes, visit ericamcafee.com/podcast. Please join us in our offline discussions in our private Facebook group by going to sistersinloss.com. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please rate and subscribe to us and leave us a 5-star review. I pray that you all have a blessed week. Keep the faith, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday.